Hey, Ariana.
Yes.
I need your advice about something.
Okay.
Okay, so you live in Arizona, right? Tucson?
I do. That's right.
Okay, so I'm in New York, as listeners might know. It is getting really hot here, and I've had to run outside a lot because I love to run. I'm training for a marathon, as you know.
Wait, you're training for a marathon?
Yeah, thanks. Thanks. Yeah, right. What's the fastest way to know somebody's training for a marathon? Yeah, weird flex, but indulge me. So, when I get back from my running, I'm like sweaty for a very long time, and I'm not used to this level of heat, and I feel like you might be. And so I'm wondering, is there a way to like cool off faster when you've been outside in the heat for a long time?
Excellent question. I don't run in the heat, so I can't give you a direct answer. However, I know people who do. It's a thing. Heat training is actually really good for you, and it'll probably make you better when you do compete because it increases the amount of oxygen in your blood, I think. But in terms of cooling off after you come back, I would say a cold shower, like turn the shower on and don't let it warm up. Just get in right away. And I think that'll help cool your body temperature a lot.
But it's so painful to do that.
I didn't say it'd be enjoyable.
Why? All right. That's very helpful. Listeners, if you have any tips for me, please do let me know because this is partially on behalf of my wife as well. Like the laundry basket is becoming a biohazard. So please. Let's dive in.
Yeah, let's get on with the show. I'm Ariana Brocious.
I'm Kushan Avidar.
And this is Climate One. Okay, so today, Kusha, I want to talk about a piece of the clean energy puzzle that you might not think about every day: grid scale battery storage.
You're right. I don't think about it every day. I mean, like Saturdays I like to take off, but you know, but many days I do actually think about batteries. And we're not talking about laptop or phone batteries, right? It's more like batteries the size of shipping containers.
Yeah, exactly. These are huge batteries, and they can take excess energy created by the wind or the sun and store it, and then put that power back on the grid even when the wind stops blowing or the sun stops shining. And right now, a lot of this actually happens the same day because these batteries can only store power for so long. So think of it as like extending the use of solar panels past sunset.
And you know, Ariana, something that I learned while recording this episode was just how rapidly growing this industry is. I mean, in 2019, there was about 1 gigawatt of battery storage in the nation's electric grid. And last year, it hit 26 gigawatts. That's 26 times the storage capacity in 5 years. And it's equivalent to the power of more than 20 nuclear power plants.
Yeah, it's a lot of juice. And, you know, we gotta say, batteries don't generate power on their own, so it's not quite the same thing as having a power plant, but it's still a huge number, and their production cost has come way down in recent years, too.
So much so that a report from Ember Energy has said in the most sunny areas, solar plus battery storage could cover up to, get this, 97% of their energy needs day and night, and that would be cheaper than coal and nuclear power.
Yeah, that's a big deal. I mean, what it's really saying is that this could be a pretty big sea change for the renewable energy industry. If we can get enough battery storage, it really makes them a much bigger part of the electric grid. However, for the industry, there's still some uncertainty about a couple things. One, how Trump's tariffs will affect all the imported battery components. And two, the fact that many of those components come from countries like China, and that could disqualify them from the tax incentives that are still available. To get a clearer picture of the grid-scale battery storage sector, I talked with Julian Spector, senior reporter at Canary Media. He's been covering the industry for a decade and has visited a lot of battery storage projects.
To be honest, they're not the most visually dynamic thing to look at. The typical archetypal battery installation, it's really a bunch of white or gray metal boxes. These are containers that are packed with racks of lithium-ion batteries, kind of in the vein of a server farm, if you've ever seen those sort of data centers where there's just these boxes stacked up and there's cooling systems to keep them all in the safe operating temperature. But it's a great design to make it easy to package these things and ship them and drop them into place. There's a lot of efficiencies, but yeah, we always struggle to illustrate our stories about battery projects because it's kind of just like a field of beige boxes. Just sitting there.
Yeah, well, it's all right. If they do the job, maybe they don't have to be
That's the thing. They should be boring. It's much better for them to be boring to look at.
So battery storage has often been seen as a companion to intermittent renewable energy, so like wind and solar that generally only produces energy when the wind is blowing, the sun is shining. So how much power can a typical grid scale battery installation hold? And, for about how long?
Yeah. Okay. So this can get a little complicated because the how long is dependent on how much they're being called on to sort of discharge back to the grid. We usually talk about batteries in terms of their capacity that they can push out to the grid in an instant, and that's in gigawatts or megawatts. And then there's the sort of storage over time, which is megawatt hours or gigawatt hours, which you can think of as like how much is in the tank to be used eventually. One frame of reference is like a nuclear power plant. The big old kind is usually around 1 gigawatt. We haven't built any battery systems quite that big yet, but it's common now to see like 200 megawatt, 300 megawatt, that kind of range. And the typical format in today's market is batteries that can discharge their full potential for like 4 hours straight. So let's say a very common type of battery plant today might be like a third of the instant power that a big old nuclear plant can do, and then it can run for 4 hours straight out. And that gets it kind of like one of the limitations of batteries is obviously they run out, and the current cost structure of lithium ion batteries, it's come way down. Like it's way cheaper than it was 10 years ago, but it's too expensive to like stack enough of them to be storing power for really long periods of time, like days. The sort of roles they're doing, you could think of as like when the sun goes down and you have this nighttime demand, everyone's coming home from work. Battery is a really good fit for taking solar from the daytime and covering up that nighttime peak window, maybe 5 to 9 p.m. kind of thing, and just like serving that with the really cheap solar power from earlier in the day. But, it's not necessarily getting us all the way through the night at the moment.
Yeah, that's a great example and a way to think about it, because I think this idea that's essentially extending the hours available that you would get from like a solar farm or a wind farm. You called 2024 a great year for energy storage. What made it such a successful year for battery storage deployment?
Well, it's really been a long time coming. So the storage industry 10 years ago, very, very small. As a reporter trying to cover it, I think I had to spend more time trying to find any project worth writing about than I actually spent writing about them. Like it was very little happening. But then a big early precursor was California passed some state level policies, like including a mandate for their utilities to buy grid batteries, and that kind of kicked off a market. And then as more batteries got installed, they just worked really well and solved problems, and they're very quick to build compared to a gas plant. And yeah, so it's kind of like the more we started using them in the US, the more people found uses for them. And so 2024 was the culmination of this long running trend building up that way. But yeah, definitely helped by the Inflation Reduction Act that passed during the Biden administration, which created the first dedicated energy storage tax credit. And then the big story was also Texas getting into battery storage in a huge way. Because for a while, it kind of really was a California thing. You're seeing Arizona utilities we're starting to build some big ones. And there are a few projects happening in other states, but it was very geographically limited. And it still is basically a California and Texas game. Texas has this free market for energy on the grid. So there's no monopoly utility deciding what power plants get built. Business people, private investors are able to come in and build a power plant they think they can make money on. And so there's rules in the market that kind of govern what the batteries can do and everything. But a lot of entrepreneurial developers decided they thought they could make a lot of money building batteries, and they did make a lot of money building batteries. And now there's gigawatts getting built. Like I think they're going to pass 10 gigawatts this year. California has already passed 10 gigawatts last year. So if you're remembering the big nuclear power plant is about a gigawatt of capacity, and we're not building 10 nuclear power plants anywhere in the US, but you can build that much in batteries like pretty quickly, actually.
Yeah, that's a remarkable statistic. And, staying on the California and Texas examples for a second here, as you mentioned, they've really led the way in developing battery storage. And there's been a lot of reports about how well the batteries have helped stabilize the grid in those states, particularly Texas, during heat events. Can you explain just really quickly how that actually works? That, what are the batteries doing mechanically to like offset peak temperatures or demand or what?
So what's great about Texas is that there's a lot of good data that the ERCOT, which kind of runs the grid, they put out.
Texas
so
grid.
Yeah, you can actually see graphs that visualize this exactly how it works. But if we take August 20th last summer, there was a record set for electricity demand. And you would think, like that's probably bad. It's a super hot summer day. Everyone's cranking the AC. Population, has been growing. There's more people moving there because California is so expensive. And, everyone's trying to stay cool. But actually, the prices didn't spike at the moment that the record demand hit, because that was kind of in the afternoon, and there's this whole new solar fleet just totally cranking, putting out lots of power. And so you have this extra capacity of newly built solar that is keeping pace with the rising demand during the sunny hours. But where the prices did start to spike, of course, after the sun goes down. So like, 7 o'clock ish, you can see the real-time price in the energy market starts shooting up. But that's when the batteries come in. And so they're able to just sort of suppress the spike in demand that, would have happened if you didn't have the gigawatts and gigawatts of batteries just built in the last 2 years. And one really clear metric of that is there's sort of a thing called like a conservation notice that they put out if the grid is running into a situation.
Like telling people, hey, turn your thermostat down a couple degrees.
Yeah, exactly. So it's like, as the person running the grid, you don't want to do that unless it's going to be bad, because, people don't want to be told they have to like not use the air conditioning or else the grid's going to break or something. So the ERCOT actually had to issue 11 of these conservation calls in the summer of 2023. Then people in Texas built all these extra batteries, and in 2024, they didn't actually have to issue any of them. So, that's like a pretty big difference from one year to the next.
And, I think, again, just to kind of emphasize this, when you're talking about places that are suffering from heat in particular, you have that solar gain that happens during the afternoon. So buildings, cities take on a lot of heat that they then have to disperse through the night. And so your cooling demand continues after the sun goes down. As you mentioned, then there's also the impact of people coming home, running their dishwasher, cooking dinner, all those things. And so there is a lot of evening demand, and this battery grid storage is really helping kind of smooth that out.
Yeah. And then also some of these increasingly hot heat waves, maybe it's never getting below 90 degrees even at night. The demand certainly continues past when the solar can help. And that's where the batteries come in and make a big difference. And that shows up in the prices people pay to your electricity bill at home. Those are lower now in Texas than they would have been without the batteries. And people have done studies on measuring how much the power prices have gone down compared to previous summers there.
Yeah, and that matters for people. So we touched on how President Biden's policies, especially the Inflation Reduction Act, helped boost grid-scale battery storage. President Trump's recent budget bill slashed incentives for a lot of renewable energy, but it did, as you mentioned, kind of leave grid-scale battery storage, alone for the most part. What implications does the new law have on this industry, though? Because there still are some impacts, right?
That's true. So one of the caveats there is the law did put in some new requirements around what they call foreign entities of concern, which basically means for the purpose of this equipment that comes from China or corporate ties to Chinese companies. There's now this like pretty detailed test that's been written into the law that companies trying to claim the tax credits are going to have to prove that the equipment in their projects doesn't exceed a certain threshold that's allowed to be from China. And that's actually could be bad for storage. At the moment, the battery technology that's most favored for these grid installations is called lithium iron phosphate. And almost all of that cell manufacturing is still in China. So the model is basically you like import these cells that are made quite cheaply and very effectively in China, and you package them in your big blandly
big gray
colored
box.
Yeah, exactly. and so folks like Tesla, or there's a company called Fluence, like that happens in the US, and you put your equipment to control it and keep it safe and everything. But basically all those developers now have to figure out, okay, does the amount of value in those imported cells from China run up against this new limit placed by Congress? It's one of these cases where the storage developers would probably say less government intrusion into the business world would probably be preferable there. But, a lot of folks are supportive of the broader effort to bring clean energy manufacturing back to the US. So in theory, this is serving that, but we got to see how the implementation actually goes.
Right. So there's some impacts in terms of what battery developers in the US are able to import, or storage battery companies are able to import. And we'll see how those how those take effect. Plus the domestic battery manufacturing industry that got a lot of boosts under President Biden's administration. There's also some challenges affecting that industry. So a lot of concerns around some of the supply chains. You mentioned the prices of lithium have gone down a lot, but there's still concerns about where a lot of the minerals that go into batteries are mined, the practices that go behind that, environmental impacts. So proponents of a circular economy want spent electric vehicle batteries to be used as grid storage. And this is really interesting because there's concern about the life of a battery in your car. You need it to be able to recharge quickly and deploy a lot of energy, but they're often retired when they still have a lot of useful life. So the company B2U just did this in California. They're expanding into Texas. And another company, Redwood Materials, just completed a grid storage project with over 700 used electric vehicle batteries. And you toured that. But what's the impact of these kinds of projects, or potential impact?
This is J.B. Straubel, who was the chief technology officer at Tesla and really built their battery business, which is a leader in the field. And he wanted to recycle batteries, figure out what do we do with them all when they're done being used. And then I've covered the battery recycling industry. It's been having some troubles. They raised a bunch of money from venture capital and had these big promises that we're going to get 99% of all the useful minerals out and put them back into the battery manufacturing supply chain, and it's all going to be great. A few years have gone by. There's been several of these companies have run out of money, closed up shop. People are finding it's harder than they had hoped to actually break down the batteries and get battery grade materials out in a way that's cost effective. But, Redwood's still building their facility for that. And in the meantime, these used battery packs were sort of piling up on the lot. And they said, wait, they might have 80% of their storage capacity in them, in the way that the iPhone will tell you now, oh, you're down to 80% of what it was when you bought it new. So a full charge doesn't last you as long. But if you're just putting it in a field with 700 other battery packs, can actually be fine. So I went out to Reno, and this is in this desert, maybe 30 minutes drive east of Reno. Redwood, they're putting the used EV packs in there. They're now selling grid scale storage way cheaper than what it would cost with brand new, fresh off the line lithium ion batteries. And with that cost structure, they're also trying to compete in this sort of long duration category, which is saying, hey, we can give you power for 24 hours straight. And this is a data center being run 24/7 on solar power generated there and put into the old EV battery packs, and then guaranteed all night long. And even if there's no sun one day, they've got enough power and stuff. So that's new as of June. But as he said, a few other companies have done this with the used packs. B2U, I saw their project, and out in sort of the outskirts of LA County near the Mojave Desert. And I had to view these myself because people have been saying, oh, why don't we just repurpose the old EV batteries? That's such a good idea. For a while, no one actually did it. So I needed to go see that myself and be like, okay, this is a real thing. It's not a ton of it happening yet, but it's possible.
So you've covered this industry for 10 years. It's changed dramatically during that time. What do you think the future of this industry will look like in the next 5 to 10 years?
Yeah. Oh, that's a good question. So I think the volume of deployments is entering the kind of hockey stick growth curve. I think a key limiting factor there is it's kind of boring, but it's basically like barriers to entry in energy markets. And the reason Texas took off so much is they let anyone who wants to build it come in and compete. And it's a fairly level playing field. You know, the legislature keeps trying to come up with ways to help out gas plants and sort of make it a less level playing field. But so far they've kept it like an open competitive market there. The problem with a lot of the US is served by old school monopoly utilities that have been around for a century, and they control everything. And, you know, there's regulators that are supposed to oversee them. But like, yeah, there's a lot of places where you couldn't just come in and build a battery, even if it would be clearly helpful and lower costs for everybody and, you know, reduce pollution compared to some old coal plant or whatever. So that'll be the thing to work on in other states to make sure everyone gets the benefit of these. And New York's been trying to build batteries, and they've got a few, but it's not really a thriving market the way Texas is, and New England. Like there's a lot of places that need to get their first few big batteries built and see that it's good and it works. And I do think we'll see more and more made in the US batteries also. Like it takes a few years to build a battery factory, and it's a $1 billion investment typically. But like LG, the big Korean company, just opened a factory in Michigan that's specifically to serve the grid stationary storage market. So yeah, I think we'll see more made in America, just more batteries. So if we're looking around and we need power fast, you got to go with what you can actually build fast, and that'll be batteries and solar in its own way too.
Mm-hmm. Great. Well, maybe we'll have you back on to evaluate the industry in a few years' time. So
yeah, we could say hopefully I got everything right and all the predictions came true.
Exactly. Julian Spector is a senior reporter at Canary Media. Thanks for joining us on Climate One.
It was a lot of fun. Thanks for having me.
Coming up, recycling batteries here in the U.S. may help change the whole energy storage supply chain.
Localizing that supply chain helps us not only from a cost perspective, it helps from a carbon footprint perspective, it helps with just supply chain security, and in the end of the day, it's going to help the consumer.
That's up next when Climate One continues.
Globally, manufacturers are ramping up production of big battery packs for grid-scale storage and electric vehicles. One of the exciting features of these batteries is that theoretically, more than 90% of the materials can be recycled and reused.
Which is huge. Think about it this way. When was the last time you recycled the gas in your car's tank?
Yeah, never.
I don't suggest people try that either. That's not a good idea. Just
not a good
making
idea.
Point, you know? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, when your car burns gas, someone, somewhere, has to pull more petroleum out of the ground, and that has to happen over and over for every tank, right? With batteries, the minerals only need to be mined once, and increasingly, facilities are attempting to make high-level battery recycling a reality.
Currently, most large pack battery recycling happens in Asia. NPR's Camila Domonoske visited a factory owned by the company Ascend, which is trying to onshore that process here in the U.S.
Past a lab with liquids spinning and dripping in giant beakers. Quick pause for safety gear.
So let's grab some goggles.
Through a nondescript door. There's a miniature chemical plant tacked onto the back of Ascend Element's R&D facility in Massachusetts. Now, miniature is relative.
I mean, we have tanks that are up to 18 feet tall.
Eric Gretz is Ascend's co-founder and chief technical officer.
And then this one here, which is taller than me, is one of our smallest tanks.
But this is a fraction of the size of the factory Ascend is building in Kentucky. This month, this little plant sent its first commercial shipment of battery materials fully recycled in the U.S. The company thinks that's a first for their kind of product. They'll go back into batteries for things like electric construction vehicles. If you don't recycle batteries, they're hazardous waste. But if you do, they're a valuable resource. The more you recycle, the less you need to mine. Step 1 is collecting and pulverizing batteries. Employee Brian Garland scoops some black powder for me.
Hang on, let me just give you a little so you can see it. And that's what we get from shredding the batteries.
Literally shredding them. This step has been happening in the U.S. for a while. But today, that powder of jumbled up minerals mostly gets shipped to Asia, where companies had a big head start on building battery supply chains for the next steps. These molecules are going on a short journey here in the States. Gretz leads the tour.
Then you get pumped down to that leaching tank there where you'll be dissolved in sulfuric acid.
Some of the minerals, like nickel and cobalt, dissolve. The graphite in the mix doesn't. That helps sort them apart.
Then you're going to go over to our impurity removal station.
The exact combination of minerals gets fine-tuned, and finally it's dried back into a powder, currently sitting on a shelf in 25-pound bags.
So it comes in as a powder, and it's leaving as a powder. It's just coming in, very impure, but leaving very pure.
Companies are trying to make the process more efficient and cleaner. At Ascend's R&D lab, right next to that production line, Matthew Valdivieso, standing before a beaker of swirling bright teal liquid, says chemistry is all about rules.
So we're trying to manipulate the rules here to make us money in the long run, and help the planet, of course.
Environmental groups do think battery recycling can help the planet if it's done right. To explain how these processes are improving, imagine you have a big Lego creation and you want to make a different Lego creation. Melting it down to make new Lego bricks would obviously be a huge waste of energy. Taking it apart and sorting all the bricks, that's more finicky but cleaner. Now, Ascend figured out you don't even have to sort all the bricks.
We're just removing the 2% that we don't want and keeping the 98% that we want together.
Lots of companies with different approaches are scaling up battery recycling in the States and trying to do it quickly. At Ascend, Rebecca Nislusen is testing samples and feeling a sense of urgency.
The pressure is on to, make this product, and as fast as we can do it, it's not fast enough even then.
In fact, the very existence of this mini chemical plant is a testament to this pressure. This is a research lab. There was never meant to be a commercial line here, but the EV industry is demanding recycled minerals now. And Ascend's billion-dollar plant in Kentucky, it's due to open next year. Camila Domonoske, NPR News, Westboro, Massachusetts.
That report was originally broadcast on NPR's All Things Considered on July 10th, 2024. Since then, Ascend has altered their plans at their Kentucky plant and agreed to return a $164 million federal grant that was awarded during the Biden era. They're still going to invest about $1 billion into the plant and onshore as much of the recycling process as possible. Now, let's dive deeper into the battery recycling sector here in the U.S. Joining me is David Klanecky. He's president of Serba Solutions, a battery recycling company that has been in this space for 30 years and recycled hundreds of millions of tons of battery material. Klanecky walked me through the recycling process for, say, an EV battery.
So if you look at an EV battery, typically an EV battery pack has like 8 to 10 modules in it that are just different, basically lithium-ion batteries that are in there. Fairly large. They weigh about 70 pounds each. We actually disassemble that battery pack, take those modules out. The frame structure that holds the batteries in the pack that I mentioned is typically made out of steel, again, reinforced steel to protect the batteries. It has also aluminum and plastic and things like that, copper harnesses. So we actually recycle all those materials as well. But once we have that module taken out of there, we put it into a device called a shredder, and it does exactly what it sounds like. It shreds the batteries. What we're trying to do is extract that very valuable powder in there that's on the cathode and the anode that contains the lithium, the nickel, the cobalt, and the manganese. So we shred those up to basically allow that powder to be removed off of the substrate there. We recover that powder. That powder is called black mass. It actually looks like black sand. So we recover that black mass powder. That's where the critical minerals are. The other material that's in a battery, like the aluminum, the copper, the plastic, things like that, we actually separate those as well. So that plastic goes to a third-party plastics recycler. The copper and aluminum, we recover that and work with a person as well, a third-party person to recover that aluminum and copper as well.
How much of that process can be done in the U.S.? Does any of it have to happen outside of the U.S.?
Yeah, currently the shredding operation to actually produce the black mass is done in the U.S. We can do that here. We've got a couple facilities that do that, one in Ohio and one in Trail, British Columbia, so in Canada. And we process batteries through those facilities. The next step that isn't done in the United States, which is what our next phase of growth is to be able to now take that black mass that has all those metals together in a mass of material and then extract each of those individually out of the black mass.
And so where does that generally happen if it's overseas?
It's usually in Asia. A lot of obviously manufacturing, Japan, Korea, China. They've been producing batteries for a long, long time, and they've got a larger footprint of material that they can access. So a lot of those, we call them hydrometallurgical refining plants. Those plants are actually over in Asia. So that material today goes back there. Those materials are removed, and then a new cathode is produced, which goes back into a new battery. So we're in the process of building that capacity in North America so we can keep those critical minerals here in the United States.
It's so interesting you bring that up with the growth phase that you're looking at, simultaneously working with overseas partners. Whenever we talk to folks on the show that are working with overseas partners, because the battery ecosystem is global.
Yeah.
The current administration comes up, right? Like think about the Inflation Reduction Act, for instance. It included grants, included incentives for battery production and recycling, but now the recent budget law has undone a number of those policies. So how has that affected your industry?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think there's two different approaches, right, that the administrations have had. Like you said, the previous administration was really focused on grants, incentives to try to attract that investment. This administration is still very, very focused on critical minerals. They still realize we need all those critical minerals because not only does your phone, my phone, our laptops rely on lithium-ion batteries, but the defense systems, military, drones. I mean, those drones don't run on engines, right? They run on batteries, right? So a lot of military applications use a lot of batteries as well. NASA, I mean, think about it. There's a lot of things that don't have a plug. You can't plug into a wall. So they use batteries. So there's a high interest with this administration in continuing to make sure that we build out the infrastructure and build out the supply chain for batteries. You think about data centers, right? They need backup systems, and those are typically battery storage systems, right? So with the growth of AI and the growth of data centers and stuff like that, batteries become also extremely important. So while we may have seen a little bit of slowdown in EV penetration just because there's less incentives to go out and buy an electric vehicle that take into effect here later this year, there's been a massive increase in data centers for AI and things like that, which need batteries as well to be able to operate. So it's interesting.
What about like tariffs though? Have tariffs really impacted the way that you're doing business?
A little bit. They've impacted us positively in some ways because the tariffs are obviously trying to attract people to build stuff in North America, right, or in the United States, right?
Exactly.
So now you got people that are saying, well, I don't want to pay that tariff, so I want to build more batteries in the U.S. because right now we're importing over 60% of the batteries that we use in this country are imported outside the United States. So that means we've got a lot of capacity still to build up to be able to self-support ourselves in batteries, right? So those tariffs have given the opportunity for those companies and those countries to say, look, we're going to build in the United States to make those batteries so we don't have to pay that tariff. Now, there's a little bit of a downside is we've got to build all those plants. We don't make a lot of steel. We don't make a lot of pumps and valves and vessels and equipment. So how do we manage that, right? Because you got these tariffs that potentially could increase the cost of building facilities in North America because some of those equipment. Now, the administration's aware of that. They're obviously going to look at ways to probably avoid some of those tariffs on things like that. As long as you're building an asset in the United States, I would think they'd be a little bit more flexible when it comes to tariffs.
Well, do you feel like there's a dialogue happening right now between folks within the industry like you and administration officials that are trying to plan out how to incentivize this kind of investment?
Yeah, absolutely. They've been extremely active, I would say, over the last 6 months and recently getting more and more active. Part of it's just learning, they're learning the industry, right? You got a lot of new people in there that didn't understand the battery industry before. Now they're learning it, but they're very engaged. Like I mentioned about critical minerals, they're concerned of what's happening with China and or that's rare earths or critical minerals. They're very concerned about that. They've said to me, like, we're looking at the periodic table right now and figuring out where we're vulnerable. And they obviously see things like the critical minerals I mentioned, the rare earths. There's some vulnerability there from third parties to be able to supply the United States on that. So they are definitely very focused on this industry and understanding what they can do to help. They kind of said it. They said, like, what can we do from a market perspective to make sure that you can cost effectively and sustainably produce material within our borders?
Oh, they ask you that directly?
Yeah.
What do you ask for?
Yeah, I mean, you've seen some of the deals that have been announced recently. I mean, there's things like there's still funding incentives that are out there. I mean, people are still asking for grants and loans. So there's, when you're talking about a new industry, it's very capital intensive. So there's a lot of capital that's needed to be able to build these assets, right? Not to create a parallel, but if you rewind 20 years ago, there were a lot of incentives given to oil companies to go out and frack for natural gas, because we wanted to be dependent on natural gas. They didn't do it all themselves and do it for free. There was a lot of incentives given there because the United States said, look, we want to reduce our dependence from natural gas from other countries. So that happened. And we've got now, that independence. I think the same thing here, they're looking at how can they help us from an incentive perspective. There's things like import-export restrictions, right? So exporting batteries, like we don't want batteries to leave our country, right? We want to keep those in here so we can recycle and recover those critical minerals. I think import control, like again, tariffs have an opportunity there to help out.
So let's talk about recycling within the context of this kind of global marketplace. Do you think battery recycling would help us compete with China who are making those new batteries at lower prices?
Absolutely. I think the more we can recycle and recover these materials, keep them within our country, the less dependent we are on going to other countries to be able to find these materials in a mining environment, for example. So we ship a lot of lithium, cobalt, nickel from countries outside the United States, whether it's Indonesia, Australia, Chile, Argentina, places like that. They're not a foreign entity of concern per se, but it's a high cost to do that. So if you can avoid all the logistics costs, the processing costs, to be able to do that locally, you create a better cost position for yourself to be able to compete. I mean, the battery industry has become more and more localized, right? You don't like shipping materials around. You don't like shipping all these things. I mean, obviously, you have supply chain issues. We faced that 5 years ago. That was a struggle for everybody. The
pandemic.
Yeah, the pandemic, the auto manufacturers struggle with chips and things like that. So localizing that supply chain only helps us not only from a cost perspective, it helps from a carbon footprint perspective. It helps with just supply chain security. And in the end of the day, it's going to help the consumer. But I think when you look at our focus and the growth we look at, it's all around lithium ion. And we are seeing, obviously, material coming from gigafactories in the United States that are producing batteries. They have defective batteries. They have scrap material when they're restarting a lineup or whatever it might be. But they produce, we call it gigafactory scrap. When a gigafactory is running, they're still producing 10 to 15% waste. It's just the way the battery operation. It's really hard to make a perfect battery. But at the same time, you don't want a defective battery in your vehicle or on your phone, right? You want everything to be perfect. Yeah. So they make sure that the quality control that they have producing those batteries is extremely stringent, which means they do find defects and they are happy to discard those and not have that risk.
So let me see that if I got that right. So you've got a factory that's making the batteries for your electric car. Every 10 batteries they make, one of those batteries defective, not good enough, they send it to you, or they send it to somebody like you.
Yep, that's correct. That is correct.
Yeah. Wow, yeah. 1 out of every 10. From your perspective, where does battery recycling fit into the industry? And what I mean by that is, how much can we currently produce with recycled batteries?
That's a great question, and we've looked at that extensively when we look at supply and demand of these materials. I think if you fast forward to 2035, 2040 timeframe, you're talking about 40 to 50% of the materials that are required for batteries in North America can be used using recycled content, recycled battery materials.
Wow. So 2035, half of the materials we need can come from recycled materials. Batteries might get more complicated in the future, right? Do you foresee that 50% being a peak and it going down from there, or staying consistent with battery technology, which I know is impossible to foresee, but do you have any sense of that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it will. I think the challenge, like you mentioned, is there's always technology evolution, right? There's different types of battery chemistries that are coming out. I mean, typically you see the nickel-based batteries are the ones that have the highest energy density, which means your phone lasts longer, your laptop lasts longer on a charge, your car can drive more miles, things like that. But I do think there's going to continue to be evolution in battery technology that I don't know if it'll make some of those materials obsolete, but it could potentially reduce the demand of those because there's either a new material or, when you look at solid state, right? Solid state is basically a battery that removes that flammable liquid electrolyte in the middle of the battery that's being used to transport the electrons from the anode to cathode. That is basically removed, but you're actually adding more lithium to the anode side of it, which again creates a higher energy density. So you just now have more lithium to recover, which is still a good thing because we know how to recover lithium, for example.
David Klanecky is president of Surba Solutions. David, thanks for all of the work you do and for hopping on to talk to us about it. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks, Kush. This was a great conversation. I really appreciate the time. Thanks for having me.
Coming up, how to reduce waste and make a new industry safer.
It's just really important that there's that transparency throughout the battery life cycle to make sure that its life can be extended and it can be recycled effectively.
That's ahead on Climate One.
We've heard about how large battery packs can help stabilize the grid, power electric vehicles, and get more renewable energy in the mix. Still, it's a fairly new industry, and there are some real concerns, not only about the production and use of these battery packs, but their recycling as well. The Global Alliance for Incinerator Alternatives has been advocating for rethinking the battery production industry in order to make batteries safer and easier to recycle. Their EV battery waste specialist, Sheila Davis, shared her concerns about the industry with Climate One's Austin Colon.
Batteries are really complex, require a lot of chemicals and a lot of resources. And so we're most concerned that the extraction, meaning mining that's required for batteries, of course, is very damaging to communities and to the environment globally, primarily in Latin America. But of course, lithium and other materials that are required for the batteries are mined all over the place. So we want to make sure that the batteries are designed so that you reduce the requirement to actually extract a lot of materials from the earth. And that's the first thing. And secondly, once a battery is being manufactured, again, it takes a lot of resources and it requires a lot of chemicals in terms of solvents and PFAS and other chemicals. So we want to make sure that there's effort to reduce the amount of hazardous chemicals that go into a battery. So there's a variety of what they call stationary uses that a battery could be used for, but it has to be designed with that in mind. And there also needs to be a certain amount of transparency about what's in the battery and how it operates so the people that are actually trying to make money off of repurposing or reusing it can do it efficiently and effectively and safely.
Right. So speaking of the battery design, I saw on the zero waste hierarchy for batteries, the largest block is rethink and redesign. So what are your suggestions for how they should be redesigned or rethought?
Well, first of all, the battery pack shouldn't be glued to the chassis,
okay.
for starters.
That's a good start.
Yeah, or connected to the chassis. So it should be able to be removed from the vehicle relatively easily. And then it should be designed so that it could be disassembled easily. So if you're trying to repair it or repurpose it, if you have to take the battery apart, then you can do it safely and efficiently, and that there's not a lot of glues and screws that prevent that from happening. So being able to disassemble it is another really key component of redesigning it. And the other is just to make sure that the information that you need to actually extend the battery's life through repurposing or repair is available to the people that are actually doing the job. And that means that the manufacturer has to make that information available, and it can't be proprietary. So you shouldn't design your product if you're a manufacturer and say, this is all secret sauce. You can't know what's in it. And because that actually forces the battery to be prematurely either disposed of or recycled.
Right. So one of the ways that a battery, like you were saying earlier, an EV battery could be reused as part of grid scale storage or, stored for renewable energy. Are there any risks posed to surrounding communities for these big grid scale battery storage facilities?
Yeah, there is a risk of fire.
Okay.
And we've seen some of that occur in California. I don't know if you're familiar with Moss Landing, but it was a battery storage facility, or they were using batteries, and there was just pretty significant fires there that kind of burnt down the whole facility, and it burned for several days, and there's just a lot of toxics that are involved. And so that's definitely a concern. As well as in Detroit, there's been a lot of battery fires, even in the manufacturing stage. And for, I guess, one area in Detroit, there was last year, maybe 8 battery fires, at facilities. And so it's a significant issue. And again, it comes back to, it's a overall design issue with the battery manufacturers to make sure that the batteries are designed so that they're safe, but also so that information about the battery safety is transferred to the person that's repurposing it. That the data safety sheets, as well as the repurposer, has all the schematics and everything else that they need so that they can reassemble it or that they can repurpose it safely.
Right, and these batteries are such a new technology. It's kind of a new industry. It seems to be there's a lack of a universal standard. Is that true?
Absolutely. It's a very new industry in the sense that the batteries themselves are so new on the market, like in the last 10 or 15 years. The technology continues to change. And if you're trying to, again, repurpose it or recycle it, that's a whole nother industry that is emerging in which there are no real standards for.
Right. So I want to get to that. So I saw in Broome County, New York, there was a community-led campaign that successfully stopped a lithium-ion battery recycling facility that was proposed for the area. And I know for a lot of our listeners, when they hear, it's a battery recycling, that sounds like a good thing. What kind of issues can be posed for a battery recycling facility to the community?
Well, that facility especially, and that was one of our members, of course, with Gaia, who actually got that facility shut down. And of course, most of it had to do with where they were locating it. It was right in the middle of a residential area. Oh. And again, the recycler wasn't being transparent about what they were doing. And they were mostly burning the batteries. Again, it wasn't a good situation or real recycling, which is something that Gaia is trying to make sure happens. Like when I say good recycling, meaning that they're not, again, tossing it in an incinerator and calling it recycling or smelting it and calling it recycling. And that was pretty much what was happening there. Okay. And so there was also a lot of air emissions that the community was able to get their hands on that wasn't basically reported by the facility in their permitting process. So that issue of the facility being very transparent about what they're doing, and any kind of battery recycling uses either some type of heat application, meaning you have to melt down the battery in order to get some of the material out potentially, or else a lot of chemicals to extract the valuable material. And so if you're located, especially near a community, that's really important to be transparent about the chemicals you're using, about the emissions, about the water use, which is another big issue, Right. So of course, recycling is a good thing in terms of being able to recover the materials, but it has to be done properly.
In some ways, that lack of transparency reminds me a little bit. I grew up in Pennsylvania, a big fracking state, and it felt like the mixes of the fracking fluid nobody really knew what was in those. And, that was getting into the land and the water. And it's like, maybe we should know what's in those because it's kind of affecting all of our communities. But
Absolutely.
Anyway, so let's say you had a magic wand and could make one big change to the industry. What is the biggest change you'd call for right now that would have the most impact?
I think the most important step, if I could wave a wand, would be for companies to use available technology. I'm talking about data analytics and artificial intelligence, that platforms that are being applied to design industries, to actually design the batteries so that they can be recycled, and that they also set targets and goals for doing that.
Excellent. Well, Sheila Davis is EV battery waste specialist at Global Alliance for Incinerator Alternatives. Sheila, thank you so much for joining Climate One today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Hey everyone, it's Kush and Ariana again. We're closing out our show, and that means it's time for Climate One More Thing. Ariana, I'll go first, and you have every right to hate me for this, but I have another plea for advice about running. Because
wait, are you running a marathon?
Oh my gosh, how did you know? So the air quality in New York is like iffy, and I've had to run very long distances on a treadmill. And, I think it's good for my lungs, as listeners might understand from listening to the last episode, but it's also frankly mind numbing. So this is just a plea to the audience. If you have any tips for how to make long indoor treadmill runs better when you're trying to protect your lungs from the outside, please just email me. It's Kusha, Kousha, @climateone.org. I will be very thankful, and I promise I'll respond. So thank you very much. That's my Climate One More Thing. Ariana, what do you got?
Yeah, so I read an interesting article this week by Grist, an online publication that focuses on climate, among other subjects. And it was all about how we can build cities to be able to better withstand heat. And as previously mentioned, I live in a hot climate. This is very applicable to me, and it's an area I just have interest in. I think city design is really cool. So this is an immersive article. It has a lot of explanations and a lot of things that I was familiar with and several I wasn't. And one of these ideas that I had not really heard about before is what are called cooling towers. And these are described as chimney-like towers you can attach to the sides of homes and buildings. And they're essentially passive cooling devices. And actually, they are used in a lot of Middle Eastern countries or Gulf countries already. But it's kind of an older technology in terms of it's not AC, but it helps bring in air, cool it as it moves through the building, through this tower. And those are the kinds of things I think we need more of as we figure out ways to make our cities better able to withstand heat. And that's our show. Thanks so much for listening. You can find out what our team is reading, articles like that, by subscribing to our newsletter. Sign up at climateone.org.
Climate One is a production of the Commonwealth Club. Our team includes Greg Dalton, Brad Marshland, Jenny Park, Ariana Brocious, Austin Colon, and Megan Basilia. Our theme music is by George Young, and I'm Kushan Avidar. Stay cool.